Hi everyone, welcome to I think my first time so Shiny course. So I'll just get started. So just I'll start walking through, but I'll give you the format of how we'll be doing things today. So this is an exploration with Shiny class. I hope all of you are excited. Yes. Okay. Okay. Good. And so I hope that all of your projects are Shiny projects in the future. Okay. So, so the layout for this talk, we're just going to be doing some introductions initially. Why Shiny? Why now? Some basics of Shiny. Some UI stuff because that's what everyone cares about. They want to make cool looking GUIs. Do some reactive programming, and we'll talk about some feature development as well as like some more cool applications that I think are cool and shiny in the Shiny world. Okay. So hi, I'm Soumya. So as Lindsay said, I was an Our Lady's New York founder. Wonderful chapter. The women are doing amazing work since I have left. I'm also on the RN Finance Committee. If you guys ever find yourselves interested in learning more about quantitative finance, there's a conference we run every year in Chicago. Feel free to come out. And I work in the public sector. One of the big things that when I discovered Shiny a couple years ago, I thought it was very interesting that you could turn your analysis and make other people excited about it. So I do a lot of hands-on development now in my job as well as even outside sometimes. Yeah, so the disclaimer, all the views in this presentation are my own, have nothing to do with my employer. I just always cover myself, okay? So let's keep talking. This is my email address and this is my Twitter handle. If folks follow that kind of stuff, please feel free to reach out. Okay, so today we're going to use mainly Shiny, obviously, so I hope you have that installed. But I wanted to quickly run through the couple of things that we're going to use in our example. So if you could install these packages right now, that would be wonderful. So it's install.packages. I can write it out on here if you want. Yeah. So I will be changing screens back and forth. So I hope you can bear with me. But if you look at my console, all that packages, right? And you just do ggplot2 or whatever else you want to install. And you can also do it. You don't have to do it all together. I think it was dt. What's over here? Yeah. So, yeah. It's right at the bottom of my screen. It's 538. Yeah, I can put the packages up again. Sorry about that. Looks like there. Since we're all sitting in tables, that when everyone's just done, just like let us know that you're done. That way I don't like rush through something. Okay, awesome. So now that we have the packages loaded, I'm going to quickly show you where my materials are. So if you go to this link, so github.com/socal1456, that's my handle, North R. I don't know why I put North R, I should have put North. Okay, so sorry about that. If you go there, I can quickly show you how to clone this. So basically, you would press this. All right, so I hope folks are familiar with cloning a repo. So essentially you just take, oh, it doesn't have it on here. I thought it was really simple. Yeah, just download it. Down. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, but is the project here? Was it here? Oh, that's right. Yeah, that's right. Okay, so sorry, I couldn't see it. So if you go to File, New Project, go to and then say version control, select Git, and then put the repository URL, you will be able to clone it, basically. And I think I have one of the windows open here. We were trying to get this ready for you guys. So yeah, if you did clone, you copy this over, and then you go in here. Yeah, if you go into File, New Project, yeah, I can do it again if that helps. Yeah, File, New Project, and then go into version control and do this. And then pull the, you can copy this link directly.
So you don't have to get this, which is fine, but I think the easiest way to do it then is just and then go to the GitHub page.
So I put the link up there. If you're cloning the repository, you can just copy this, you can type it in. You don't have to go to the page and copy it down. That makes it easier. These are good. These are good. Okay, so is everyone good? I'm just going to start moving forward then. Everyone good? Okay, excellent. Yeah, that one. Yep. Yeah. They don't, I mean, they don't need to open it. They can just open the, yeah. They don't need to open the project necessarily. Okay. All right, so let's get back to business. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So once you have this, the reason why I want you guys to have it is because it has all of my material as well as the demos and things we're going to walk through today as part of the workshop. So it's just easier if you just can have a copy of the repo itself. Okay, so I wanted to quickly say thank you to the couple of folks that have helped inspire this tutorial in the sense. So when I first started learning Shiny, I saw it at a conference. There weren't a lot of materials out there, but there's the RStudio crew, the Shiny team, and specifically Joe Chang and Dean Talley were have just like so much work published on this area. So it was very easy to follow and understand. So a lot of the work that I'm going to show you or examples are inspired from how they taught the stuff. So just so you all know. So what is Shiny? Basically, it's an RStudio package authored by Joe Chang, right? It's a web development framework that you can use in R. So it means that you don't need to know any CSS or JavaScript or whatever. And it can be used to build interactive web pages with R, which is like the most exciting part. So why is Shiny amazing? So again, you don't need to know any HTML, CSS, JavaScript, anything, which I think is kind of awesome. You can share R analysis with anyone. Either across, at any point in an organization, and they can understand it because they can understand click buttons. And it just has now, as the community has been growing, it has also matured quite a bit in the sense that there's a lot of really cool stuff happening. I think recently some of the RStudio folks have come out with packages where you can actually have talking Shiny apps, which I thought was kind of cool. So there's a lot of cool stuff happening. So keep an eye on Twitter and the RStudio blogs to keep track of all of that. Okay, so you guys are ready? Let's start doing this. Okay, so you guys already have Shiny installed, right? So the first thing that we're going to do is just do the first part. So run example, and this is actually part of the first example that's part of the Shiny package. So all you're going to do is do run example 01 hello, and I'm going to do it with you. So that way, see. Okay, perfect. So this is a pretty cool application, I think, in the sense that it kind of shows you, okay, well, this is what's happening behind the scenes, and this is just a simple layout of a histogram, right? That's all it is. It just, you change the slide bar and the histogram changes. So what I wanted you to see here, which I think is one of the coolest features of Shiny, is that the showcase, when you're running this, you're actually using a command called showcase. And as you change the slider, it actually highlights the code that changed with it, that just ran, so that you can actually keep track. This is really great in small applications. As your applications get bigger and more complex, obviously you cannot be running this and watching highlights. So, but it's great when you're first starting out and you're trying to learn and get excited, or even just show other people how code works. It's a really cool sort of feature that they have created. Okay, cool. Slide deck. Cool. So there are a couple different ways and a couple different parts of Shiny. So every Shiny app is made up of two parts, right? So there's a UI, which is basically your front end of the application. And then there's a server, which has contains all the functionality. So the UI is the web page. So as in it's the layout, it's actually laying out from R to HTML, how the website should look. Because normally it's all written in HTML, right? The server is essentially the computer that powers the application. So when we just ran an app, our computer was the server essentially, and the UI was the app, right? Okay. When you eventually publish your applications, you're going to publish it to an actual server, which is like a bigger computer essentially, and that will run it, and then you will be able to view it on a web page, right? Okay. So just the basic. Let's just look at the basic Shiny template, which is just to have a UI with a fluid page, as you see, like it's just a wrapper for like how the UI looks. A server function, which has an input and an output, essentially it's a function. And then to run Shiny, to run the application, you run this command called Shiny app, and where your UI and server are set to the two parts that you set up above. So you guys all are aware in R you make variables. When you make variables, you have the pointed arrows to make a variable. So in this case, we're making a variable called UI. We're making a variable called, well, not a variable, these are not variable objects, but anyway, but like an object called server. And then in the Shiny app command, we're passing the UI and the server object and then running the application, right? Okay. So there are a couple different ways to run Shiny apps, as in how you create them and how you run them. So the first one is you just create a standalone Shiny app, which you'll see actually in a second. So the reason why you want to do this is if you have a small application, then you don't want to get into the business of making huge files and having a big file system. You can just have everything in one application. So you'll have your UI, you'll have your server, you'll have your libraries up top, and you'll have all your functionality in your server and have all your pretty layout in your UI. Okay. So and your file must be named app.r in RStudio especially, because then what RStudio does really nicely is that it recognizes it as a Shiny app, which is kind of cool. So let's start with doing our first example, and it's called app01.r. So I'll just show you in a second where to find it. So if you go on the demo examples, it's the first one underneath there, app01.r. And yeah, sometimes RStudio is goofy and it doesn't recognize this. So the way you have to do this is to just comment out wherever I have this same, please comment that out. I apologize about that. Sometimes RStudio doesn't recognize this. And yeah, if you can just hit Control A and hit run, you'll see an app pop up. And basically all this app right now contains is the words hello Shiny, because that's all I've included in it. Yeah. Sure. Yeah, sure. So it's the file called app_01.r. It's under the so it's under my folder called North R Shiny, and it is under the folder code and demo examples. And so it's app01. I apologize about the folders. I know it's a lot to navigate. No, it's under code. In demo examples, yeah, and it's right there. Yeah. And in that, I think so. I had made a small thing because I thought it would recognize the app. It didn't. So just please delete the you know, the line that says, or right after the same part. Just remove this so that it ends here. That's it. Yeah. Yeah, thank you. Because sometimes it recognizes it. Yeah, so here now it recognizes it as an app. I think my comment messed it up. So if you remove that, you'll see that RStudio actually recognizes this as an application. You see the run app button on the top, right? Okay. Some other things that you can do with this is to be able to run this in the viewer pane, right? Instead of having to run it as a separate window, you can actually view it here if it works, yeah. So just some cool features that you can actually do with RStudio. How's everyone doing? Good? Good? Okay, cool.
I think maybe just slow down. Yeah, I think there's a lot of people who have.
Okay, yeah, no problem. Absolutely, absolutely.
Some of them don't have kids.
Okay, for this date. Okay. I can. So you can actually have it show up here, run in viewer pane, and then hit run app, and it'll show up in your viewer pane. So it'll show up on your right-hand side of the file. That's good. First shiny apps, right? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I think the reason why the run app button isn't showing for one
Because I
is
have
you
the
have to
comment.
save it from the comment.
Yeah, that's what I do.
Yeah.
It becomes an app.
And then if you resave it,
Yeah, sorry about that. This is when you do it too often yourself, you forget that these are things like that I'm really,
I think some of them have trouble to show it like on your panel here.
if it's, okay, yeah, sure, let me see. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, you're saying.
Okay, so I'm gonna forge on forward. Yeah? Okay, cool. Awesome. Okay, so that's the first method to run run an app in just one single file. The second method is just create a separate UI and server file. So when you start building more more complex applications and you start having multiple functionalities, you'd actually want to probably separate your user interface and your server file to make sure that, because you probably would have other functionality you would be adding, so maybe global functions, et cetera, that you'll be using in your application. So then you'd probably want it to be a separate file altogether. And the way that would look, so if you go under code, it's app_o2 here. Basically, I have a file that says ui.r and says server.r. And both of these, if you notice in our studio, automatically it recognizes that this is an app. So it says if you hit any one of them, it'll run the application. It's the exact same application we just ran before with just the title panel that says Hello Chinese. So that's the second method of doing this. So as I said, it's great for really more complex applications. Most of our examples today will be very, very simple. They'll be app.r files because it's just easier to also make concepts clear. So, but as you get more evolved, you'll do more of this. Yeah, we just tried this example. And then the method 3, the other way to make a Shiny app. Method 2, oh, sure. So method 2 was here on code. It was under, so it was to make two separate files, the UI.r and the server.r. And so if you go under the example here that I have under app02 to actually do UI.r and open it, you would see that our studio recognizes it. So all I did here was separate the UI portion from the server portion in two different files. And then if you run it, it's the exact same functionality. It's just to have two different ways to do it. You don't need that. That's actually what the run app is doing. That's why I had commented out. That's what happened. Yeah. So when you hit the run app button, that's a good question. That is what the Shiny app is actually saying. When you saw the Shiny app line, that's actually what it's doing. So if you decide not to run in our studio, you know how to run an app. Okay, cool. Then the third way to do this is to actually create, you can actually go to our studio, they even have a template for an app now. So you can say I'm making a Shiny web app and go through and list it out. So let's try app test, right? And you can say I want to create it as a single file or multiple file and it'll create a directory for you and just, you can create the application.
How did you get to this?
So it's under file new. Okay. Okay. So we're good with the 3. Anyone have any questions about the 3 methods?
When you do something,
yeah.
Could you say what you're doing as you're doing it? So if we're not looking at what you're doing.
Okay.
Could you do that?
Sure. Okay. So are we good with the 3 methods then? Yeah. Okay, great. Okay. So the three methods of creating a Shiny app include, so yeah, sorry about me switching screens. It's just difficult to show everything in a PowerPoint or sorry, a slide deck. So the first method, right, we talked about, which was app01, which we did the demo example, which was basically you just create an entire app in one place, and you have the UI, you have the server, and this Shiny app UI, Shiny app that's run, this is actually what your run app button is doing. They've actually automated it for you. So in this case, if you actually took this out of here, you'd be able to see that it runs an application. But yeah, so if you hit this button, if you look at the bottom, it's just running an example. So, and that's your first example of how to create a Shiny app. The second example is to do, have the UI and server files separately. So this is actually found, this example I've put under North R Shiny under code, and it's under app_o2. And it has the UI file as well as the server file. So this, again, it's the same functionality. So as the other as the other application where we just saw, which was just with the title and then with the server. So it's just to break it out to help out. And this particular type of way of doing it is because as you build and add more functionality, add more parts to your user interface, or add more parts to your server function, you would then want them as two separate files so you could keep track of where things were growing or where things are going wrong if they're going wrong. The third way to do this, to make an application, would be to go to new file. That's actually the title of it, so I'm not just repeating things. And then navigate to Shiny Web App. And then here you'd be able to just name your application and select which type of method from 1 and 2 that we just did earlier, and how you want to create an application. And then otherwise you can run examples. Okay. All right. Feeling good? Okay, good. Okay. Awesome. Okay. So let's run a real app. And we're going to get started with our first one. So again, if you navigate to the folder demo code exercises, and I'll do that with you so that we don't get confused. So if you go under North Shiny and you go under code, you'll find demo examples. In the first part here, you'll find app_01.r. And this is, again, the same application. Or I think I was trying to run, which one was I trying to run? Hold on. Sorry, 1 second. Sorry, I forgot which one. Oh, so it's add title 03. So under exercises, I apologize. Under exercises, go under add_title_03. And this is under code, under exercises. If you go to the code folder, go to the exercises folder, and the file titled add_title03. What I've done here primarily is just download the 538 package. This package has a bunch of data from, so for us to use. So we're just using some test data. In this case, I have actually uploaded the airline data, which talks about airline safety. And so it just has 2 different components. And if you just run the application, you'll get to see what's in it. So I just set this to run in my thing here. So this is the application. It has a table. If you hit the drop down, you'll be able to change the table as well as the underlying table. This is a summary, and then it has an underlying table that picks what Aeromexico, what specifically is wrong with it, or how many fatalities it has. So it provides all the data set for you. So was everyone able to find it and run it? Yeah? Okay, great. So you got it?
No, I mean,
yeah.
So it was not named app.com. It was named something else.
Yeah, it's named something else. Yeah, I think that should be okay. So to be honest with you, I don't usually do one file development. So that's why if I mess something up, that was why. Usually my files are much bigger. So I think RStudio just recognizes it for you. Most of the time it can pick it up. I think when it sees the UI and server in the same file. Okay, cool. Okay. All right. So the first thing I was going to say was to just add a title to this. On our first app, we saw a title panel, and on this one, it doesn't have a title if you look at the code. So I was wondering if we could try adding a title to this application. So for comparison, I'll open the other file for all of you. So this one had a title panel up top. In this one, if you look under the UI, there is no title panel. So when you open the application, it just has tables and data, but it doesn't actually have, so if you look at the application, it just has the drop down, but it doesn't actually have a title. So it would be great if we could add a title to it. So you can take a stab at it. There's a solution and I'll show it. So. You guys were able to add the table?
Rough day, rough break.
Oh.
Servers and UI files. You have multiple servers?
Not in the same project.
Just one
One
server,
of each,
UI.
yes.
And then how do I know that they're going to see each other?
Because they'll be in the same project.
That's how it
the
sees
way.
the server.
Yeah,
Is it
yeah,
just looks inside the project.
yeah. That's basically how.
Because I've been writing them all on one.
No, don't do that. It probably gets very confusing.
You gotta break that down.
Yeah, yeah. You have to break that down for sure. I would just make it separate projects. That's the best way to do it.
Yeah, and then it just sees it's in the same order. The UI sees the server. And
Yes,
Thank you.
yeah, no problem. Yes, hi. This is actually, this is, yeah, so it's actually created in, so it's in Martin, but it's a specific language called Zarian. I can't pronounce it, but if you, it's, I'll be posting the markdown on the, yeah, I mean, I love it. I transformed to, started using this a year ago and I haven't gone back to it. There's also an officer there too. So let's call this officer.
Officer.
Yeah. If you do a lot of PowerPoint, people don't want that. But you can use my Git to see how I've set it up. So that way yeah. So I don't know if this can publish markings. It is a marking document. So yeah. So you usually I would just publish this. You kind of embed in this. I'm going to embed it in Sarah. And then embed it in marking documents. So it just, yeah, I haven't tried putting it in presentations. So are we all good? Did we all add a title to this? Yes? Yes? Excellent. Excellent. Okay. Okay. So I'm just going to show you the solution because I don't, I hope that's okay. So all you would have to have all you would have to do here is to add a title panel up here because we saw the title panel on the first application that we saw, right, where it said Hello Shiny. And all you have to do to make a title on this application was to add it to the first line after the UI. And then you would say, look at this awesome data. Okay. Okay. And that would be your title or whatever more creative or different ways you guys came up with. Okay. Okay. So we've been looking at Shiny apps now for a little bit. Now everyone's getting comfortable with it, right? So the UI portion, as we talked about, every Shiny app has two things, right? It has a UI, it has a server. The UI contains, basically allows you to lay out the application's appearance. The server, it gives you instructions on how to run the application, right? So it's like you're telling the user, hey, go tell me what you want to filter on. And then I select that and then I run a calculation or I run a filtering or whatever to present the right data to you. Okay, so now we're gonna start building a real app with the college grad student data from the 538 package. So you guys already have this package downloaded, so the data should exist. So for this mainly, I have two requirements of what I'm thinking of, what will the design of the app be, right? So one thing I want for the user to be able to select two inputs. So as in to be able to select the X and the Y axis for a graph. And then the second part is I want to see the graph, right? That's it. So let's start with just the basics of the application that we've been looking at so far, right? So we have library, we have our libraries that we're calling because we want our data to be loaded correctly. We have the UI set up, which is empty right now. The server function set up, again, empty. And then we have Shiny app because we want to make sure it just runs, right? Okay, cool. So let's start with the UI, okay? So again, remember the UI portion of the app is the part of the thing that the Fluid page is wrapping. And so basically what this is Fluid page sets up a visual structure for the application, right? And there are many things you can do with applications to lay out beautiful applications, as you see. And so one of the things that I asked for, because what I outlined in my scope of what I want to build in this thing was an input, right? So I wanted the user to be able to select the x-axis and the y-axis of the data. So what I wanted that to look like a drop down. So because I wanted that to look like a drop down, R Shiny already has a widget for this, and it's called select input. So for right now, I'm just going to ask you to take my word for this, and we'll go through widgets and things in a few minutes. And so basically, this is just for me to be able to select something and do a drop down, right? And then there are other portions of the UI which has the verbatim text output or a table output, because I want to spit information back out. So the UI is made up of two portions. One is for me to interact and say, hey, I want to select this and I want to do this. And then second portion, the output, where it's like, okay, now the server has done, it's running, it's all of its calculations, and then it spits out an answer. That's also what I want to see in my UI, right? I just don't want it to run. Okay. So that's what the UI has right now. Okay. So the UI is actually just underlying the UI is actually HTML, right? So we talked about this. So there are other widgets, like for example, it's the slider input. So if I use the slider input, that's, this is again another widget that's created from the Shiny universe. What the UI page with all of this wrapping is actually doing is creating this HTML code in the background. And thank God that we don't have to write that. Okay, so, and ours is much simpler. Okay. So all HTML tags can be found at the tag glossary. So let's quickly look at it, because then I can show you. So the RStudio page, the glossary page, is really useful. I would recommend that as you start building out more applications, you refer to this page and refer to other parts of the RStudio articles page with Shiny as just your reference point whenever you're going forward. So this has, so as I said, they have some things that are widgets that are already built, and all you have to do is, like, as we did with the slider input, put in a value, put in something. And then you also have other things that you may want to add to your application, where you say, hey, I actually want a little bit more control in my application. I don't want to do HTML still, but I still want to use some of the HTML's functionality. And so that's what this allows you, this concept of tags. It allows you to use that functionality in a more, still in the Shiny framework. So if I wanted to make like my headers big or something like that, I could do that. And the way tags work is you have tags $h1, okay? And I'll show you an example in a second. So some of the very simple ones are like, if you wanted a big header, or you wanted a line break, or you had to write a paragraph, so you wanted to bold something, right? Those are all important things. And so you can access this using the tags object. So you just do tags, $h1. Okay. So this is an example of if I wanted to put a header and I wanted to put a break, this is how I would do it. So you don't have to use tags for the most common objects. Those you can even call directly, like H1 you can actually call directly, but sometimes it's for some of the more complicated ones you might want to use tags. Okay, so this is our first example of with a tag within a UI. So again, what we're basically doing is just looking at different ways of like building a cool UI. That's all where we're at right now. And on this page, if you see, so this application right now has one big header, and then one sort of H1 through I think H7 are the different header sizes. So it has that. It has a break, and it has a bold text. So if you go to this example in the file, the application here, you will actually be able to see it. So if you go under demo examples, and I think this one is, I forget my name. This one? Okay, perfect. Is it this one? Okay. Oh, this one? Yep. Okay, perfect, yeah. So it's this one. I should recognize it myself. So if you select UI underscore HTML05, you should be able to run it and look at what the application produces. So in this application, as I said, all I'm saying is, all I'm trying to do is, instead of using widgets that like automatically place things in a UI, I want to say I have a little bit more creative control of my UI. So I want to be able to place things in different parts, and I want things to be bolded, and I want things to be underlined, whatever I want to do. So this allows me to do that. Okay. Was everyone able to run this example? Yeah? Okay, cool. Okay, so sometimes, so as you saw, the layout was like, it was just stacking everything one over the other, right? So one of the cool things that you will see it into the presentation. But essentially, it's kind of like you can select different columns and different rows and be able to, that's why it allows you to do a fluid row or a column, and you can actually lay out things. That again gets very complex for us. We don't want to we're not in the business of trying to like build crazy applications right now. We're trying to get our basic stuff down. But I'm just showing you that this functionality is available to you. If you decide to go down the path of like really trying to figure out that I want this drop down here and this drop down here and something else in the middle, you should be able to find a way to configure that. Okay. Yeah. Oh, okay. Did my file go? I hope I didn't close it. Okay. Oh, there we go. Yeah, so that's what we talked about in terms of the advanced layouts. We're not going to be covering that today. That's for when you get better and become really kick-ass at this. So we're going to go back to doing some examples again. So I want to show you just doing a demo again. So this one is the basics u_ui.4. So the other optionality, when you don't want to sit down and specify everything, or you don't want to stack everything in a UI, would be to do a sidebar layout or a full layout. So you can actually select saying, hey, I want this. So our studio has actually created these packages where they allow you to lay out an application and say, I want this menu to be in this sidebar, and I want the graph to be here. So what we're building here is now we have a title at the top, which we already wrote, and then we have a sidebar panel and a main panel. So I'll show you how that looks. So if you run this is your sidebar panel, and this is your main panel, and then on top is your title panel. So when you decide that you want to add certain widgets, you can decide which panel you want to add that widget to. So instead of, again, so the 3 different ways of laying out your UI, right? One is to basically just stack it using 8 tags, right? The second way was to select the column, the fluid row column, and match it like a grid. And the third way is to use the paneling, the layouts that are available already. So it's up to you and how you feel and what you're trying to do also, because if you're trying to make a simple application to convince your boss of a project, you don't want to sit there designing grids and things like that, right? You want a quick turnaround. Okay. So yeah, and obviously even the layouts have some flexibility. So like if I wanted my sidebar to be somewhere else, this could actually be on the right-hand side. I think it's not big enough to show you yet. So it's actually, I've positioned my sidebar on the right, originally was on the left. So there is some flexibility that you can also have with this. Sure, yeah. So from the original, it was, so if you look at the original piece of code, which is also there, it's under basics_ui_04.r. This one in the sidebar layout, you have an option in the function to say position equals left or right. And I think the default position is left. Since I wanted it to be on the right, I added this function in. I added this parameter in, and I said position equals right, and then moved it to the right. Yeah, great question. Yeah, sure. Yeah, so if you ever need to look up a function, what you do is do !, sidebar layout, right? And it already figures out that I'm typing something related to sidebar. It's like, this is where you need to go. And if you're connected, basically you can actually do that, and it then finds which package it belongs to and where that function sits. And then you can look up the other arguments in it. So here in this case, the arguments, I can look up what I need. So it has position, it has fluid, main panel. I can add other things if I wanted to. Okay. And something to note, so the title panel is a function of its own. The sidebar layout is a function of its own, and it contains this sidebar panel and main panel that are a part of it, right? So because that's how I'm laying it out. So it's like this wrapper that's allowing me to create these layouts. So just to show you again, right? This is the wrapper, and it's allowing me to create these layouts for the main panel and the side panel, right? And the The sidebar layout is the actual layout function that I'm using. So there are many different ways, and there are many other functions available to do this kind of layouts. We just happen to be using these two today because I thought they were the easiest to use. So yeah, so you can also use layouts and tags, which we already talked about the second method with the tags, the HTML tags with like tag $H1, tag $. So you can also use both of them. So I wanted to show you how powerful that can be. So let me do that. So that's tags underscore HTML underscore 06. And yeah, so I'll show you the display first because I think that's cooler, it's more compelling. So when I'm using this, I'm using the same layout, but because I'm using the sidebar layout, so I want like my application to be here. But I also decided that, hey, I actually want to be able to display things in a different color. I want to be able to display things and write some text. So I'm then still adding the tags back into it. So let me show you the code now. And the code here allows you to see again. So it says title panel, my Shiny app, right? Which came up on the left-hand side. And then the sidebar layout, which contains, again, the sidebar panel and the main panel. And then, yeah, it's tags underscore HTML underscore 06. Yep. Yeah. And then this has, so as you can see, it has the layout with the, with each of the panels broken out, as well as the HTML tags, which is the paragraph when I want it to be strong and bolded. If I want a line break, it has all of that stuff. Okay, so just to show you some of the widgets that we talked about, right? So these are the kinds of things that you can use in Shiny. You can use buttons, you can use checkboxes, you can use drop downs, kind of cool stuff. Play with it all if you can. I think I tried to incorporate as many of them as I could in my example. So you can add widgets anywhere within the layout of your application. All widgets have two things in common, right? They have a name that you have to give it so that you can reference it in the server function. So when what the widget allows me to do is like to say to the user, hey, you can now interact with this data. And all you have to do is, click a button. But I need to know what that user has fed, right? What that user selected in the server. So the user connects them. And I'll show you in code example how that works. And then there's a label that's needed. That's to just label the widget application itself. So, okay. Okay, so this is so back to our project that we were working on. So we were trying to create an app, if you remember, with college graduate data. And we were using this data from the 538 package. And what we wanted to do was to have two things, right? Have a plot, and two, have the ability for the user to be able to select the X and the Y axis using a dropdown. So that's exactly what we've built here. If you look, oh my God, that totally happened. What you have is you have the sidebar layout and the sidebar panel, which we talked about, right? Where we laid out how we want the app to look. And then you have a select input, which is essentially a widget for a dropdown. And this is what I mean by input ID. So the input ID is what I, in the server function, will now know that you've selected for. So if you selected grad total for the Y axis, it will be under this variable called Y. And then the label is the Y axis because that's actually the Y axis of the graph, right? And then the select input is the second one is the X axis. Again, the label there is X axis. And if you selected major category, it would pass to the X variable, which is then passed to the server. So this is just the layout. This is not actually the functionality. So this is just how it's going to look. So that's the input part where the user interacts and actually clicks on things and then says, what am I selecting and what do I want to see? The second part is actually the output, which is, hey, like I want a result from this, right? I want to actually see a plot come out. So that's the scatter plot. And that's what I'm doing. So I'm using good old ggplot2 here, which is great. One of the best libraries I've ever seen. So that's what I'm putting out as an output. Okay, so let's see if I can run this application and show you what it looks like in its current state. Okay. So for the rest of these, I've actually put everything in exercises because from now on, we'll be working through that and hopefully it'll be a little easier to navigate. So it first starts with college_grad_app. And then we'll just be going successively through every time. So just to show you what the application looks like in its current state. So we just covered the layout, right? So we just did the two, let me close these and make this bigger so you guys can all see. So if you remember, we just walked through the UI portion where the sidebar layout with the side panel with the two select inputs and the output. I have the server function down here that I've written up, and we'll see, we'll be talking about building that in just a second, but I want you to see what the application looks like. So you just need to run it. So again, this is the under exercises, it's called college _ grad _ data. And so here, as we said, this was our requirement. We just wanted to be able to select the y-axis and select the x-axis, right? So the layout, and this is like, so you'll see we'll be able to filter this better. This is the layout that I want to see. And so all I've done so far is just lay out the UI. On the left-hand side, I want the drop downs. On the right-hand side, I want the plot, okay? Okay, let's get the presentation. I need to stop switching between operating systems constantly. I've become really bad at this now. So, well, everything about that. Okay, so now we've talked a little bit about a UI, but what happens when you're actually running an application? So every time you run a Shiny application, it's actually a session. A session of the application is like a live instance, right? And it begins whenever you hit that run app button, okay? Each session is independent. So as in, if you run an app and you click something and I run the application and I click something, it shouldn't copy whatever he's clicking. That shouldn't be, I shouldn't have a ghost behind me. So all sessions are independent and privately scoped, okay? So that's very important for you to remember as you start developing more complex applications. Because right now, all of your functionality lives in the server. But when you develop more complex applications, you might want some of this functionality to be outside, or because you might want something saved, because if you're running a complicated model, things like that, you wouldn't want every person to be running that result, right? So just things to think about. But yeah. So now we switch to the server. Okay. So the server is composed of three things, right? So it has the session. Every time you run it, creates a session. It has an input and it has an output. So the input it's taking is from the UI portion, which is from the user interface, right? It's taking whatever you clicked in those drop downs, it's taking that and saying, okay, I'm going to filter that and graph those two things. That's what the server is doing, making the functionality work. And basically it takes in the input object, which is like a list like object. Everything in Shiny that's processed when it's taken in are all list objects. Just so you're aware, when you have to, if you have things that you're going to pass later on, you're going to have to be careful and make sure that they're all list objects. Okay, so the example here is I have a UI that has this numeric input, right? How does this translate to a server? So server function only, okay, I think I was doing something else here. Okay, so the server function will actually take this count. That's what it'll recognize as the server function. Then in addition, you have to be careful that input objects are only read when you actually pass it as an input object to the server. And it can't be updated inside the server. So if you decide that, hey, the user clicked 30, but I want to pass 85, you can't do that. That's not what this allows. Because basically Shiny works in a reactive framework. And the reactive framework is encapsulated within the UI and the server. So outside of that reactivity, it doesn't capture your value. So if you run this, you'll actually get an error. You'll say, it's not, I don't know what you're trying to do. It's just not running in the right framework, basically what it says. So these variables, whatever you're passing from the inputs, can only be read in render functions or other reactive functions within the Shiny portion, the server portion, sorry. So the other types of outputs, the outputs are also reactive, right? Because you have to return something back to the UI. So whatever it recalculates, it's also reactive. And the idea of reactivity is that every time you make a change in the interface, I should be able to recalculate it and return a change back, right? That's what it means to be reactive. And so the render functionality here allows you to also allow for that to happen. So again, I'm talking about making a plot. So I had the user select from the two drop downs. I had the user select X, select Y, and then I want to return a plot. I can't just say, oh, ggplot2 server. I have to say render plot and then put ggplot inside it. And then it says, oh, I need to make this a reactive plot. Got it. Then it makes it a plot, and then that's how the user can see the plot. Okay? So there are lots of different ways to do rendering, and there are a lot of different render functions that are part of the Shiny library. And so these are some of them. These are the most common ones, I think. So it's just useful to know them sometimes off the top of your head. Okay, so render functions basically do two things, right? We just talked about it. So it does one, allows for reactive context, as in so it lets you track your input and output uses. And then it also converts our code to HTML to display, right? Because your render is basically saying, hey, ggplot, I want to change the ggplot object to an actual plot and show it to the user, right? So it's changing it to that HTML. Okay, so again, in this case, so yeah, I wanted you to see this example. This is a very simple example of a text output. So in the UI, I have a text output that has a message, and this has nothing, this is not getting updated by the user. But then in my output, in my server function, to render that message, I have to do render text. And all I'm doing is saying, hello, Shiny message. And if you notice, I have to label everything. So the UI and server recognize each other, but I have to constantly tell them where to recognize each other. So if I say, oh, you have to recognize the object message, that's how the UI part is going to know, oh, okay, it needs the hello Shiny course message. So it has to be labeled, and make sure that you label everything correctly and make sure that they're aligned every time. That's where a lot of people make mistakes. Okay. So yeah, so Shiny uses a lot of reactivity to make apps interactive. So stay tuned for that. I'll be talking more about that. And in reactivity, basically, you're telling someone to do something without actually telling them to do it right this second. So as in when it changes, then it reacts and it changes, right? So basically, when we're giving them the server function, we're saying, oh, these are the instructions to do this. When the user changes X and Y, execute the instructions, right? So we're not constantly telling the server, hey, you need to run it, you need to run it. We just run the application once. But when the user clicks X or the user clicks Y, that's when the change happens. And that's what the reactivity is, right? Okay, so let's go back to our data set where we had the college grad data. Again, my requirement was very simple there. All I wanted to have was to have the user be able to select the X and the Y axis and then have a plot return. So this is the portion where I'm actually creating the plot in the server function. So as I said earlier, I'm using ggplot. So I'm passing the college grads data. And then I'm using this input $x and input $y. If you remember from the UI, I had labeled the object X for the X axis, for whatever the user input in, and then Y for the Y axis. So that's all it's doing here is it's taking those objects and then making them the X and Y axis. But now again, I can't just say, hey, scatterplot, output scatterplot, just go ggplot is your object. I have to actually use the render plot function to convert it into an HTML object so that it spits out the right kind of result for the user to see, okay? So just a summary of how to build applications, and we're gonna do some exercises. I think we might be coming up on a break anyway. So, so the summary is, okay, so one, you start from the app template. And we've come pretty far actually, if you think about it. So you had 3 ways to start from the app template, right? 1, you could do it from our studio. 2, you could do it, you could make the UI server function separately. Or 3, you could just make one app.r file, right? Then you add to the UI, the UI, which is to the fluid page portion. So we saw 3 different ways to do that, right? One was you could add layouts, the sidebar and all that stuff. You could do just stack one on top of each other. You saw that too. Or you could do the tagging, where you said, I have the common tagging and I want to bold things, and you could do a combination of that, right? That's the third one. The input, we saw a couple of widgets, right? We just used 2 of them. We created the select input. So that was the drop down menus, but there are many other widgets. And you can, if you click on the presentation, the links are there to go to the widgets place. So you can make sliders, you can make, what else? Text input sessions, whatever you want to make. The output, we just made our first output with the plot, right? So, and then we use the server to calculate what was the X and the Y axis to actually create that input and output. And so we created our first app. Do you guys want to see it before the break? Yeah? Okay, cool. I'm excited that you said that because I was going to do it anyway. Okay. Okay. So that's what we just created, right? So we have the Y-axis, the X-axis, where we said User, you select whatever you want to select. This is object Y. User, select major category. This is object X. And then it basically mapped it to this in the server. And then we got a result. And then we got a plot. We used ggplot, and we got a plot, and then that plot was returned back. So if you quickly look at the code before I pause. Oh yeah, I could do that. Sometimes it doesn't work with some of the stuff I created. It doesn't like me. Well, actually, I think it's because I'm in all these folders, so that's what is going on. So we're gonna try this. You guys can. I think they're gonna run screaming. Ah, how did I show it earlier? I don't even remember the code. Showcase true, or was it? No, it's here. It's the showcase. I can't remember. Okay, we'll do it after the break for the showcase. Yeah, we'll just do it after the break. I just can't remember the syntax off the top of my head. But essentially, what it's basically doing, and I'll show it to you guys again after the break, is that I took these two inputs. These were both drop downs. If you remember, I had this Y, which is this object, this input ID, and then I'm referring to it down here because I'm putting input $X, input $Y into my ggplot. And then as the user is changing it, it's resulting in different graphs and showing different majors. And then we're going to do some filtering and do some reactivity later on. But we got our first basic app down. So congrats. Enjoy your break.
Take about 15, 20 minutes. We'll float around if you guys have grab us.
How you doing?
Is it on? Yeah. Okay. You can.
Use our studio that looks all the
No worries. Yeah, sorry. Yes, you can actually do it. Sorry, yeah. Thanks for asking. Let me show you. Yeah, so this is the list object. This every time I'm passing, these are the list objects I'm passing. So whatever I select, that list object is passed here to the ggplot.
And do you have to have that stuff in a certain place?
It's not in a certain place. I've labeled it. Well, oh, you mean the data itself?
Yeah, the data itself.
So yeah, because I've loaded 538, that's why it's there. But otherwise, you can always do a read CSV or depending on what you're using. So
and that would be
just before here. That would be outside. No, actually, it would be. That's a really good question. So it would be here. You would do read CSV, or
so it's going to look in your environment for something.
Yes, it would look for.
Now you're into the flow.
I hope so. I hope they don't. She was getting really mad at me. I was like, oh my god.
Really? From across the room?
Yeah. She was like, you need to slow down. I was like, oh, I'm trying. I just talk so fast. So, but yeah. No. It's like an exercise to be able to break something down for somebody. I think it's like,
Totally.
yeah. So no, like it's good. I'm learning too.
Yeah. Great.
Yeah.
Well, I wanted to pull up Zoom again. We were able to capture all of your audio and this small bit of your face here.
Okay.
But the screen that you're sharing is stuck on this. For some
Oh,
reason.
why?
I'm not sure.
Oh,
So-
you know why? Maybe it got pushed to the other screen because this was sharing the. Because I never unpaused it.
Oh.
So it never shared it.
Okay, well, now we know. So
I'm so sorry about that.
that's okay. It's not
I
a problem.
didn't
We're
realize-
all learning.
I didn't realize that's what was happening.
And I'm glad we got the audio working. So
Yeah.
we're
Okay.
Not
I
a problem.
apologize.
Don't
Oh
worry
my
about
god, that's so silly. I'm so nervous. Okay, I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
All right, we're gonna get started in about a couple minutes. Is that all right? Can we start in 2 minutes?
Yeah. That's fine.
How those variable maps do the server thing?
Yeah, that's what I was trying to do. But
Yeah,
it
yeah.
wasn't coming back.
I mean, we did on the input for the output too.
Yeah.
Just like how that variable
Maps.
name is.
I'm gonna go through it
Yeah,
again, do
yeah,
the
yeah,
summary again.
yeah.
That's what I'm gonna do. Okay. Is it good to start? I'm sure it is. I didn't even No, it's okay. I think it's mainly, yeah, it's mainly like the fact it's just like a lot of changes. Yeah, a lot of things. That's what it is. That's why you see me struggling. I'm like, oh, where did it all go? I think I need like 2 screens. Yeah. Yeah.
Just wanted to offer.
Thank you. No, that's really.
You sure?
Yeah, I'm okay. It's fine. I think it'll be really. I think that'll be another thing I mess up on. Oh. Hello? Okay. Ready to get started? I'm so glad all of you came back. Okay. Okay. So I'm just going to start again with the summary of the application, as we're gonna. I'm just going to take it that my joke was just that good. Okay, so we're going to start back up with the summary to build the Shiny apps. So as we covered so far, right, there are a couple different ways to make an app from a template. One is from the R template itself, right? You can click on File, New Project, and you can create, or New File and create a new Shiny app. You can do, you can create the UI server file separately, or you can create one app.r file. The second was to focus on the UI itself, which is the fluid page. So that's why I call it add to the fluid page. So the fluid page wraps all of the UI basically. So the third part is to create the input functions, which are the widgets that we talked about, how the user interacts with the app itself, right? To say if they want drop downs or sliders or checkboxes, whatever. And then the output is, again, what the user sees as a result of doing all of this. So either a table or a graph or whatever. And then the server.r portion or file, depending on how you set it up, is basically what connects the input to the output, right? So as in it takes an input, does some calculation or some filtering, and then results in an output. Okay, cool. So just as a reminder, let me show you our first app. Was everyone able to get this running on break? Oh yeah, and I think a pro tip from someone here, I didn't know if you guys realized when you clone the repos, you actually, or downloaded the repos, you also get the presentation. So I don't know if you guys realize that, but you have it. You have everything that I have. So you can actually see my presentation on there. If you feel I'm running back and forth, you can open it. It's the presentation.rmd file. And just run it, yeah. Or the HTML file, whichever you find easier to use. Okay, so going through the application. So let's talk through, we just did the summary. Let's just look how that plays out. So again, remember I was creating an app from the with college student data, which is, let me show you what that looks like. I think I might even have it. So I had loaded this earlier. So basically has rank, it has major code, it has major category, then it has a whole bunch of other stuff like the total number of students that they surveyed, I guess, the sample size, the number of women and men, the number of people employed, unemployed. That's within this data set. So I just decided that for our example here, I was only going to look at some of the employed statistics. And then I wanted to be able to just make a plot, right? And I wanted the user to be able to select by major, like what they studied in school essentially, and their category, whether they were unemployed or employed. So let's go back to the application. In the application, all I wanted in that was to be able to say, hey, as a user, I should be able to select X, select Y, and then show a graph. So what does that mean? So again, as we talked about, here I'm using the layout functionality. So remember, UIs have 3 ways you can make a UI. You can lay it out to stack on top of each other. You can do the HTML where you can actually use tags, or you can use the tags that you don't need to, that are already incorporated in Shiny. So you don't need to do tags, dollar, or whatever. And then the third way is layout, right? So we're using layout because we figured, hey, we just want a simple application, drop downs and a graph. And in this, so I have a layout of with again, it's all in the fluid page portion. I have a sidebar layout, which means I have one side and then one side, right? And on the left-hand side, I'm going to have my 2 drop downs because that's where the default is on this. And I didn't change the default. And in this, I have my y-axis, and I only selected 3 things I wanted to see, right? The employment statistics. So employed, they're employed full-time, or they're unemployed, just by numbers. And by default, I have it selected to employed. And you'll see that in a second. I have a label for this is what you see in the application, right? Under select input, that's one of the arguments is label. So because I want the user to know, oh, this is the y-axis that they will be selecting. And then the input ID is what I want the server to recognize. So that's the y, because I'm saying, oh, this is the y value for the graph, right? And then again, I have the second portion, which is for the x-axis. So again, my input ID here is x. The label is x-axis because I want the user to know what they're picking, and they're picking for the x-axis. As you know from the data set, I have the major that they're studying, like specifically, and then the major category, as in like if it's engineering or biochemical engineering. So major category is biochemical engineering, and then the major is biochemical engineering. And then I have, as part of the main panel, so the sidebar is the left side, the main panel is the actual plot, which is the output. And then I have the actual server file, which connects the inputs that I'm taking from the user to the output, which is the graph that I'm showing. Although both of those are directed up here, the actual calculation for those are done in the server file. Again, for the server file to set this up, because I can't just call a ggplot object directly in the server, I have to do a render plot, right? Because it has to actually render the application. And because, why is this? Because Shiny is actually reactive. So I can only use things in a reactive context. So either I use a reactive function, which we'll talk about in a little bit, or I use render functions because I want to just render a message or render a plot in this case. So I'm wrapping it around the ggplot object. And then I'm also passing it the, I don't know why this is coming, the input $x and the input $y, which I want to remind you up here, is basically the drop down, whatever is getting selected. So here, again, in the drop down, it's select input and input ID. I've labeled it as Y because I want to remember that this is the Y axis. And then I've labeled this as X. So that's what it's getting passed to here is input $x and input $y. And remember, these are list-like objects, okay? So let's just look at the application. All of our hard work. Yeah. So yeah, we wanted the sidebar layout. We have the 2 drop downs. The selected that I had in my categories that you saw there, in the select input, I have an argument in the selected input labeled selected that tells you what my default will be at any point. So anytime I log into the application, it's always going to show employed and major category, okay? And then as I change this is what reactive means, that as I select something different, things keep changing. That means every time I change it, the server is like, oh, it's been changed by the user. I must go run this now. And so that's what it's doing. Okay. Cool. Everyone feeling awesome about this? Ready for more shiny apps?
That's one quick question. The 538 package has a bunch of data sets in it.
Yes.
This file that we're looking at
Yes.
is the only place where you call the actual data file. Is that in the bottom?
Yeah, so actually that's a great question. And someone else I think asked this earlier. I forgot to mention it. Yeah, so in this data set, yeah, I am, so because 538 is actually a data package and I decided to use it because it has small data sets and are good for examples, you don't actually have to load the data set separately. Usually when you're pulling your own data, either you'll have to get it from SQL, so do ODBC or whatever you're setting up your connections, or you'll have to load a file from CSV so that you do read CSV, the read underscore CSV I have listed here. And then, if you were loading data from another package that didn't have it set up properly, or you were loading it from your project folder, you would do load data. So depending on what you're doing.
What's the name of this actual set?
It's in here. I think it's called college grad data, or college recent grads,
So,
where it's data.
I guess that's my question. Is that
Yeah.
the only place in this
Where I'm
currently
using
where
the
you're
data.
actually pulling the data?
Yeah,
I got
because
it. Thanks.
it's actually, yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, so you actually don't need the data to set up anything else right now because my inputs are very simple.
Without stressing.
Okay, glad you're unstressed.
Thank you.
You can also sometimes pass, depending on how you're structuring your drop downs, et cetera. Like if I wanted more options in my drop down, I would then be trying to load the data, load portions of the data into the choices portion here, as you can see. But right now, as I said, just hard coded 2 selections. So I just put it in there. Yeah, so then the data is actually only being called when I'm making the ggplot in the data argument. Yeah. Great question, thank you. All right. So let's try, so I have an exercise for you now. So let's try making a new user input to select, so I hope everyone's familiar with ggplot. Are you guys all familiar with ggplot? Okay, excellent. So this is basically to just add a line type to ggplot. Right now it's basically points. All I want to do is add a geom line argument, which is a plus geom line. The ggplot framework works with plus signs, not the pipe. So the input ID for that would be line. The label would be line type. The choices would be dashed or dotted, so just 2 choices. And the default on that would be dotted. And so all I'm asking is that you update the UI with this new way for me to select it, and then update the server so that, and the ggplot portion in the server, so that I can see this line type. You can update the file labeled run college underscore grad underscore app.r.
Wandering around to help.
Yeah, and I'll be wandering around as well in a second. So So in the geom line, the argument to pass the line type, it's actually just called line type. So in there, just so you guys know.
So if you look into the line here, it's taking the line element so just passing back and forth to the user selection. And then just yeah, so if you look here, that's an output. You're telling it ahead of time. And then in the super part here, you're actually
So a lot of things that they were like, oh, I
modifying scatter plot.
our studio has actually.
I just found that.
Yeah, does that help?
Yeah, I just got to Oh.
Awesome. How did we do with app number 2? Everyone has dotted and dashed lines? Yeah. Where do I have it? Oh, I don't know why that is, actually. That should not be there. Actually, no, well, I do because of the inputs. But yeah, it's fine. I don't think it changes. Yeah, I think you can. You can. Yeah, because we're passing the shiny input in here. Yeah. 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 Sorry, I think I just do this on default now. I apologize. Yeah. It's really good. I think all of your questions have been helping me realize how much I use just randomly, and then yeah. Yeah. So this was the second app. Seems like everyone was pretty successful. I saw some impressive dots and dashes. Yeah. Cool. Let's get back to the presentation then. Okay. So I think everyone's feeling pretty comfortable now connecting the two, right? And adding something. Okay, great. So yeah, so you can find the solution actually in college_grad_app_02. This does not mean that you cheated the rest of the exercises though, just because you know now how I work. I would hope that you would do the rest of them. Okay. Yeah, you can keep using that, or you can open the solution. The solution is like the next one. It just says 02, 03, 04. That's the next step. Yeah, please don't cheat. That would be my recommendation. So I have a second exercise for you because you guys were so awesome with this one. Okay. So this time we're trying a different widget, and it might require you to look it up. It's called the checkbox input. So basically it allows you to check a box and then it creates some behavior. So what I would like to see in the app would be create a checkbox, and if I check it, I get a table result, and I use DT, the package DT, which you guys downloaded at the beginning. And I think I have here show the first 10 rows of the data. If you show all the data also, it's fine. So don't worry about showing the first 10 rows. So update your application that you have working now and just add these two things. So again, in the UI portion, you're going to add this checkbox input. And in your bottom, you're going to create a new portion of the server function, another type of object, where you're going to render this render table. That's what you're going to use. So just to give you an idea about the links of the, let me find the link of the widgets. I can show you what the checkbox looks like. Yeah, so in here, oh, the checkbox. Yeah, so this is the checkbox that I'm asking for. It's basically when I check it, a table shows up. When I uncheck it, there's no table. That's it. That's what the functionality is. And to look up other widgets, here's the link. It's also, I guess, in the presentation. If you pull up the presentation, you'll be able to find it. Yeah, sure. Yeah. Yes, for sure. Sorry about that. Yeah. Just a little hint, the checkbox input and the data table output would be in the UI portion, and the DT render table is what's going to be in the server portion. And we'll go over the solution. So. Oh yeah, you guys can work together. I hope that's very much encouraged. You don't have, this is not an individual competition. I have no prizes.
Like add a checkbox.
Just get
Oh, got it. Oh, not bad. Yeah, So this is
I guess I could tell it to,
yeah.
well, I mean,
Shiny duck.
yeah, that's.
So that's like a
Yeah, and then I walk by somebody's house, and they're like, "Did you go try that for a boss?" It never is.
There's always something new around the corner.
So, you know. So,
Yeah.
he's having a problem. It's giving him an error message. Sorry.
Okay. Oh, object employed not found. Why is it saying that? Okay.
No. So what's going to happen is there's going to be some input and this particular thing. So that's going to be the name of the input. Stuff like that. The default that shows up in those tabs. And these are all. So once one of these is then that becomes the value of y, input $y or
change this. Oops.
Yeah. Actually, so
I don't know.
Oh, right. Oh.
I think you could just do, for example, output magazine and give it a unique output. And that's how you reverse it. This one is all, yeah. That's why so you do another one of these actually. Yeah. Well, just available, but like for example,
It's the signal group. It works, right?
Yeah, so I just changed that. I think I would change the data set at the end, so I'll announce it right now.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
It's just when they do it.
Yeah,
the
because the
employee
data
is
set,
not-
yeah, it's the
Okay.
data set.
Okay.
I'll, yeah, somebody
Okay.
pointed out, so I got it. Thank you. Okay. Oh, I'm gonna- Hi all. Looks like everyone. I just wanted to quickly point out, so if you open college_grad_app_03, I was playing around with different college data sets. So the data set should read college_recent_grads. That's the data set we're using. So I think I had changed it. Yeah, it's just, this is the data set name. It's college_recent_grads. Yeah, I can come. It needs this exact grad.
No, that's the opposite. If you go to where the change bonds.
All right, did we have success with app 3? No? I'm hearing no here. You guys need a few more minutes? I don't need to start it back up. Another minute? Okay, no problem. Yep.
Four.
Yes.
When I run your number 4,
Yes.
another thing doesn't appear. Like error.
Because I ran 04 and it was
04.
fine. Yeah, it was fine. It should work. It was just working for me. Oh, come up here. Come up here. Oh.
So you can either change the
I'm just saying.
Okay, everyone's ready to get back to going through this? So in example 3 or exercise 3, we were just trying to add this functionality to do a show data table versus not showing a data table, right? Oh, and I think I'm running a different version of the application, so let me run the one that all of you are on before I terrify you. Yeah. So here, all I wanted to do was to be able to show data table and show not show data table. So the way to do that would have been to say to add this checkbox input, which would have been your widget. And as we talked about in all widgets, you have an input ID that you say that you have to pass because that's what the server is going to read as your to know that this is the input it should be talking to. The label is you want to show data table, so you want the user to know what they're trying to do, and then the value, right? We said it true because you want the default to be true. Then in the second part, in the server part, you're trying to set up your actual data table. So you want to say, hey, if there's an input, if this input exists, then I want to do this data table. I basically want it to exist. So here I'm passing using the data table functionality from the package DT. I'm passing the data college recent grads, which is the function, the data set I'm using for my ggplot as well as this. The options are, you can, however many you want to show in one page. I chose 10 because I just wanted to show 10 observations at a time. And I didn't want row names to show up here, so I just took them out. So these are options that you can play around with. So even if you just did DT, like, you're correct and on point. And then once this data table is figured out, the user has selected that they want to see the table, you've spoken to the server is like, okay, I had the table ready. Then in the main panel, you have to pass a DT data table output, which was to say, using the object that the server created. So you pass the input here, input $show data, which was what the user selected, saying, I want to see a table. And then you created a server object that's called output $college data, college underscore data. And then that was passed to the main panel where you actually put the table out using the DT data table output. The output ID was college data, right? So because you're showing that data set up in the output. Okay, cool. Everyone was successful or gets it, and I'm seeing some yeses, some no's. Yeah, okay. Yeah.
So the show and search, that's part of.
With the show entries, yeah, that's part of DT's data table function. So again, if you look up, right, so we talked about this, and this is a really useful thing to do whenever you have a question like this, to say, I want to look up this data table. So how do I do that? So I do question mark data table, and then it'll actually search, and it tells you data table is part of so many different packages. You would have to find the one that you used and then find the functionality that's with it. I think it might be the first. It would be under DT, so I don't see DT here. But you'd have to search for it and find it. There you go. So data table output, data table, yeah. And then here you'd be able to look up the actual usages with all the optionality. So there's a ton of optionality. It allows you to scroll, not scroll. And overall, I would say DT is a really great package to get familiar with because it has a lot of JavaScript features enabled in it. So if you played around with the table, you could actually sort it. There's actually some other inbuilt capabilities of being able to export it to a PDF or an Excel. That's just a button that you set up. So I'd recommend that you really try to use the DT package as much as you can. So as we were talking about earlier, right? Reactivity, what is it? We were saying that, hey, reactivity is when the user interacts with the interface and then Shiny does something, right? So Shiny supports reactivity. This is what people get so excited about. They're like, I can play with analysis. So essentially when some variable changes in the front, something else changes. In regular R, you would actually have to go in and say, hey, I want to change this, update this value. With Shiny, you don't have to do that. Okay, so in this case, again, I was talking a little bit more about reactivity to make it more clear as to how we were connecting. So here I have an input $platinum, right? Where I'm trying to this is just an arbitrary example. This relies on basically this output takes that information in, and your output again would be in your server function. And it just, it relies on that input $platinum changing. And in this case, I'm again doing a plot. So again, reactivity always, I have to do this in a reactive context. So I'm doing this in a render function. Okay. So reactive objects, there are 3 different types of reactive objects. So there's a reactive source, which is where the user interacts with the, has an interaction. So they're reactive values. And the example is input $. This is what you'd normally find in your UI, right? And then you have a reactive endpoint, which is a resulting plot or table. And this is always a reactive that comes out. The data table output, that was a, reactive endpoint. And then there's I think, yeah, this observe should be on top. The observe is a reactive endpoint as well. And then there's a reactive conductor, which basically conducts the sources and the endpoints together. And in that case, you can actually use reactive expressions, which are like, if you can think of functions in R, when you write a function in R, a reactive expression is very similar to that. And we're going to see examples of how to do this. So let's talk about reactive objects. So let's update this college grad app now, the same one that we've built. We're on version 03 now for everyone. And what I want to include now is a drop-down filter on the major category. So if you played with the data on this, you saw that there was one on the x-axis. The x-axis had major and major category. Under major category, you could select engineering, and the graph looked like something you'd show a sane person. If you selected major, it was just insanity. So, but I don't want to look at insanity. I want to see neat things. I want to see patterns. So I want to create a drop down that's based on the major categories. So then I can see what's, like, if I select engineering, or if I select, I don't know, science, I should be able to see what is it physics, is it chemistry, see all of that together. Okay, so we're going to do these three things now. We're going to filter and save this as a reactive expression. We're going to show the filter data set in the plot, and then we're going to show the filter data set in the table. Now we're going to do this together, so you guys don't have to fret. So let's start the first part, right? So we have the UI. You guys are very familiar with UIs. I can see everyone was very successful in updating them. So again, I wanted to create a drop-down. The drop-down translation to the widget is called a select input, right? So I wanted to create a drop-down for the major category. And this time, I don't want to type up all the different major categories. There are so many in there. So I just want to pass it directly from the data itself. So what I do here is I create my input ID, which is major category. This is what the server is going to recognize when I say filter for me. Then I have a label, and that's major category because I want the people interacting with the application to know, hey, I need to filter on this major category. Then I have choices. The choices is usually the list for the dropdown that you provide. In this case, I not only want to, as I said, I don't want to write out everything. So I'm going to choose the unique parts of the college recent grads column where major category sits. Only the unique values, because I don't want every value, because there might be engineering listed 5 times because you would be including medical engineering, chemical engineering, whatever. So I selected engineering in this case. Okay, that's my first part. Now I've created that in the UI. So all I've done so far is just create my dropdown, right? Okay. Now, in the server part, I want there to be some filtering. But if you remember, the 2 things I have to do is filter for the plot and filter for the table. So that means I'd have to go to the plot and do filtering there, and then do the same filtering again. Obviously, when you're doing things a couple of times, that means there should be a function or something that you can wrap it in. So Shiny's answer to that is to create a reactive framework or a reactive expression. So in this case, it's like a function. This is exactly like a function. Well, not exactly, but the syntax looks very similar to a function, obviously. So you put reactive, and you're saying I require that someone selects a major category. That's what this require thing does. And then I want to basically use dbplyr, which is to use filtering. So all I want to do is I want to take this data, and I want to filter major category with whatever the user has selected, this input $ major category, right? Because I created this UI up top here. Okay.
Are you using
so that's a filtering, like it's just an easy way to yes. Well, dbplyr is more like using databases. Right. So yeah, it's the same functionality for this. Yeah, you don't have to. I just, yep. Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that's a great question. Yep. So this is not checkbox. This is a drop down. So yeah, you'll see in a second. So let me show you the application. Maybe that'll help sort of clarify what I'm trying to do here. So this is what I want. This is what I'm trying to build. Yeah. So what I want is I want this major category to exist, and I want to be able to, and this graph right now doesn't make a whole lot of sense, right? Because my x-axis is selected as a major category. But doesn't this look a lot better? Because now I can finally see under engineering, what are the different types of engineering and where are people employed, right? I want to be able to filter the data in different ways. So if I change this and I change this to other categories, and I can see, oh, by agriculture, what are the different types of majors in agriculture? And then how many of them are employed, or the case may be unemployed, whatever. So that's what I was trying to do. But I not only want this to be updated, the plot, I also want the table to be updated. So because of that, I want to create a separate expression that I can just leverage twice, right? So that's what I'm trying to do here. So in this case, I've created a select input. We just saw this where I created this UI portion and I've put it in the UI. I've added some other functionality, so that's why you're seeing this. My main panel stays the same because I'm still showing the same plot and I'm still showing the same data. In the server portion, I create a reactive, which is like a function, not the same as a function, but a reactive basically returns a value, essentially. So whenever whenever I as a user interact with it, it returns some value. And then that value is sent to ggplot and the table. So if you remember in the previous example, so we'll just switch really quickly, I hope you can bear with me. Here, when we had ggplot, we had the data set actually going in here, college recent grads. But because we have now created a reactive expression where we're saying, hey, can you actually filter this on this input? And this input being input major category, then we can just pass the reactive itself, which is, and so the way you pass reactives is you have to put these parentheses around them. And they don't take any arguments, so you're just returning a value. So the reactives get passed to both the major subset. My reactive is called major subset. So I pass the reactive major subset into ggplot as well as into the data table. And that's how I'm getting the result where I can actually filter on each table. Good. Okay. So yeah, so just to show you, so the previous page was the reactive expression. So I created this, then I'm transferring it here where I'm passing the major subset, which is the reactive expression. So your turn. So we're gonna make a title function using a reactive expression. So if you can open College Grad app 5, I think that is the one that has it, and make an expression. I seem to have lost my thing here. To basically have the user put in an expression. And so the way you would do that is have text input from the widgets. If you remember, let's go back to the widget page. This widget you're going to try is to have a text input like this for the user, so they can enter in whatever they want the title to look like. And then you're going to create a reactive around it, and then the result is going to show up as the text on top. And that is going to show up in the main panel area because you want your title to be in the main panel area. So to show you in the application, so I have this application. I want a text box here that I can create. The result to be this title up here that comes up here. On the main panel portion, the input of text input is in the sidebar panel portion, and that's it. Yeah, and your reactive portion is obviously going to be in your server because anything that you're doing with functions or doing calculating, that you're doing in your server. Which one is it? 5? Oh, and is it? There's some issue. No, I think I'm fine. I just get a warning, but nothing else. I just ignored it. But oh, wait, no, there's something. Yeah. Is there an error? Okay. Well, then something about. Can you just do it using 04 then? Ignore 05, and I'll add the solution. I'll show you the solution in a second. Oh, 04 is fine. Yeah.
I think 05 is intentionally broken.
No, it's not. I think it might be intentionally broken because I forgot that I had an example in there. So please, yeah.
Or because your slides just fix that.
Yeah.
And yes, that you can
Okay. Okay, that's fine. Thank you. I think I realized, yeah. Oh, I had already added it in there. Oh, I think you just have to fix 05 to make it work. Yeah. Okay, I forgot. Sorry. Yeah, so it basically has the functionality in there. Yeah. If you go back to
Try loading the flyer, maybe. Sometimes. No, I think we have some conflict.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, you should be able to run 05. Thank you for that, catching that. I forgot that I had done half of the work in this one.
If anyone else is having trouble, load eFlyR instead of dbFlyR.
Yeah. I think there are some conflicts. I think you were having the same issue. So if you load dplyr, did it work for you after you did that? Just load dplyr. So take out the B. It still has the issue.
Yeah, so you need the 05 is the one where you have to correct it. And just change that library. So there, I'll explain why that happens. Sometimes there are conflicts in the packages because they have similar names. So sometimes they can, if you have loaded with your machine, they can always, yeah.
Chinese that way.
So what you have to do is to get the see if the vibe there's yeah. So the text input exists, so that I've actually already created for you. So you don't need to do anything there. So no, you don't need to change the plot, right? Because all we're trying to do is add a title on top. Yeah. All you need is yeah. So in line 63, so there I have this thing where I'm creating a plot, right? But you can't just tell objects to exist, right? We just talked about reactive objects. In Shiny, we have reactive environments. You can't just tell objects to exist the way you normally tell them to exist in R. So in this case, what I'm actually asking you to create a reactive expression from the upper thing. So you have basically, not render because in this case you're not. I just want you to create a reactive object. So if you scroll down. You can just create this output that I put in there.
Yeah, have a picture.
Yeah, so you see the title already. I guess so basically, the input is coming in, and then I'm asking you to add the title and create an output. You have like a text output. And then, yeah, you have to add it. That's what I want. Yeah, you add it here. Because you want it above. Oh, no, you have to also correct this down here to do reactive. Make it a reactive, which is a render content. Yeah, it's either create a reactive expression or do render text. Yeah. So I guess the first thing you should maybe say is how would you first log out? So forget everything. You want to put it up top of the account. I wouldn't put it below it. You want it up.
I just want to.
No, so that would be how the server is. Then you would need to create that object server reactive.
Oh, and like. Yeah. Functions and then things that.
So in this case, you create one here.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
And definitely number formats.
Not entirely sure. I'll try.
Really tricky.
Yeah. Give it a try.
Like I would have, yeah.
Yeah.
No, but I looked ahead.
You looked ahead.
I couldn't figure out how to do the
So the reactive was the bottom.
in which one?
In the same 05. There's a reactive on 64. On line 64. We just walked through an example of a reactive. Okay. So I think a lot of you were successful. Yes? Yes. Okay, cool. I mean, we can also talk after, so no big deal, but let me just quickly walk you through how this was done. I myself forgot that I had actually provided a lot of the work in here. So the text input was when you want the user to enter using a widget, which is a text input widget. This is created here. It's called plot title, right? And the label is plot title. And essentially the placeholder would be whatever you want the user to say or to see. So that's in your text input. You wanted the title to appear on top of the plot. So you wanted the title to appear, to come on the ggplot portion where you could add labs title, right? And in there, you had to just correct, basically in the server file, you just had to correct this title, because all I'm doing is like taking whatever the user's typing in and then just making it capital letters. That's it, just because that looks like a title to me. And what I was hoping we could all see is that the reason why this didn't work is because the Shiny doesn't like objects that just come randomly through, right? So we actually have to make this a reactive object. And so the way we would do that is to actually make this reactive, right? Where is it? Yeah, with the parenthesis like this, and then, right? And then now we don't have so now we just created an actual reactive object. But in ggplot, we still are telling this to go pull some output $pretty plot title, which is not correct. So we need to actually pass it the reactive object. And if you look the syntax, which is here from line 64 to 67 for the other reactive portion we created, you're actually passing it like something that is changing. So it's actually like almost like an encapsulated environment you're passing it. So that's why you need to add these parentheses here. You're not passing it just a variable. So when you do that, now when I save it and I would run it, I should be able to, unless I screwed something up, be able to see the title, right? So if I write title, yeah, then I can write this up here. And this changes every time I change it. So I don't like titles, right? So it should show up as I don't like titles, okay? That's what, yeah.
So in the major subset, you have to track.
Yeah.
That means you're required to take it in by and left that in. So that's on the module.
Yeah.
So that rec means
yep.
I'm not going to do whatever I'm putting next.
Yeah. Exactly. So it requires you to, yeah. That's great that you figured out why I thought it was happening. Yeah, so going back, so what she's talking about is in this, I wanted the user to always select the category, the major category. So I put this as a requirement before the filtering occurred because I didn't want it to just randomly just start filtering when the app opened. And this is really important when you have applications where you have so many actions that you're depending on. You don't want things to just start happening and the user's like, I can't interact with this, it's frozen. So that's what it was, to prevent that. With the title, yeah, we left this a little bit more open, but yeah, if you wanted to be more robust, you could actually put that in here as well in your reactive portion and say, I need a title before I do anything. Cool. Okay. I'm trying to find my presentation. Okay, great. So reactives. So what does it help me do, right? It helps when everything gets re-executed. So basically, if I change something as a user on the interface, it helps me change it. It changes it automatically for me. It reduces duplication, right? Because then I don't have to, if I've already created this plot pretty title, then I can put this on all of my plots after that, right? I can say, if I create another plot, all I have to do is, again, just pass this plot pretty title to that title portion, and whenever I type, it would update 2 different plots, which is kind of cool. And so this over time can help you manage complex calculations. So as you're going forward and you're building, say you're building a model or you're building something that needs to be calculated every time, it's always better to wrap that in a reactive function than doing that in your ggplot portion. so that you're not like pulling data from there. Okay, so again, reactive context, right? Reactives can only be used in 3 different ways, right? In a render function, that's a reactive context, which you saw with render plot, render text. You can use the reactive with the parentheses, which is what we just did, the exercise, right? To assign a reactive variable. And then you can also use observes, which we haven't quite used yet. We're going to use in a little bit. Okay. So this means that you can't do this. So if you wanted out of your server and you wanted to print input $X, you can't print what's going on in between because that's a reactive function. The way you'd have to do that is then pass that to an output in the UI, and that's how that would come out. So just so you're aware, there are limitations to it being reactive. Okay, so implementation of reactive conductor, sorry. They can access values or other reactive expressions, which is what we just saw. So if I wanted to build another reactive function on the pretty title, I could do that because it can access other reactives. It returns a value, and it's great for caching. So this is, again, another important thing for reactive conductors is that when you're having a number of users use applications, you don't want the calculation to change unless the user specifically says they want to run it. And so it saves those results. So you want to keep that in the back of your mind. Okay, and then you have observe, which we talked about earlier, which was the reactive endpoints, right? So these can access reactive sources and reactive expressions, but they don't return a value. They're actually known for their side effects. So an observe, if you will, is like saying if I had the checkbox and I just say, when I check the box, observe and do this thing, but it doesn't return it in any way. So I can't use that later on. It's just, I do it once and it's done and then the value is lost, okay? Every time it changes, that's what happens. It's an action. It's not a value with an action, okay?
So you can ask a question?
Yeah.
Just bring it to the console and use this for plugging. Is that how you?
Yeah, I mean, you could if you wanted to. I think they're like, Shiny actually has been I think maturing quite a bit in the sense of how you can test things. So there's Shiny tests now. There's ProfWis, which you can use for general R stuff, R packages, but you can also use it for Shiny. So I would use those frameworks. If it's a smaller application, yeah, go ahead and debug using print. If you wanted to use it, yeah, you could. Yeah. So let's make a simple demo of using observe. So what we simply want to do here is to just add an alert. So we want to be able to, when the user comes in, we want to be able to say hi to the user, okay? So the one thing that we didn't cover in our widget so far was an action button. So what if like the user comes into the application and they click this button and then this button shows something? That's what I want to happen. And in this case, I want to be able to say hi to the user and give them directions. So I've named my button 1 because I want it to be called that. And this will be in the UI portion that I would have it. And then I would have, and I wanted the label to be directions because I want the user to know that when they click this button, they are going to get directions. So, and then in my server portion, all I'm trying to do here is to say, okay, when this button is clicked, so observe input $button1, which means when the button's state is changed. So if the button's clicked, it's like I have been clicked. And then I want to say, and I can use the show modal library, which is part of Shiny's library. It's a function to basically create a message, a pop-up message. And then what that does is it says directions. You're looking at this data. So it tells you what you're looking at. So we can see how this works in action. So it came up because I hadn't paused it. I didn't say, oh, I must click it. But basically I have this button here on the main panel. I put it here. But every time I click it, it says, hey, you're looking at recent college grad data from the 538 package in R. Because I wanted the user to know that. Okay, so that's what I did with my observe. So let me show you the functionality that I used to create that. So we just walked through it. So again, the observe, where we created the button and the how the input should relate, that is put in the server. I just tied it at the bottom here to an observe. So again, remember, observe doesn't, you're not storing anything in an observe. Once you've done it, you've hit it, it's gone. And it's basically used for its side effects. In the main panel, this is where I put my action button, another widget, right? And I put the button 1 and I called it directions. That was it. Okay. Oh, I don't know. Okay, great. So both basically contain expressions that can be executed. The differences are that when you use reactive, they return values, but observers don't, right? So observers create buttons or create actions, sorry. And observers basically eagerly respond to reactives, but reactive expressions don't respond unless you do a calculation. So they just stay at their previous remain state, and that value remains in the application. But observers, every time you say you're changing something, it's changing with you. So if you're building a more complex model, be very careful of having it based off an observer, because as soon as you touch a slider, it'll start changing. While if you use a reactive, and one of the functions that you could use in a reactive is like an event reactive, that would wait for the user to say, oh, I have to click on this button, then this person will do this. And if I click on this, or some other event will trigger it. But observe the moment the slider changes or the moment something changes, it will change. Okay, I don't know how much time we have left today. So 5 minutes. Okay, so then I'll just wrap up. I was hoping we could do a observe button for you guys to build a pop-up message, but you can do that in your own time. So now that you have built apps, congratulations, number one. This was, I hope you got a lot out of this. You can actually publish your application. So you can go to www.shinyapps.io. That's our studio's Shiny app server available to publish on. Make sure your app files are in one folder, so that, you know how we talked about creating a project, right? So make sure your things are there, and then just follow the directions from our studio to publish, so that you can share it with other people. I think it's like a certain amount of times it's free, and then after that you pay like $20 a month or something. Include Shiny in your reports. You can actually, if you make markdown files as reports, you can also include Shiny in it. Directly, all you have to do is set the output to the HTML document and set runtime to Shiny, and you can actually have interactive features and standalone reports, which I thought was kind of cool. And then you could actually publish that to the Shiny server as well. Again, I thought super cool. So now it can run as a website. So other cool things. So this I got from Di Natale. I think I follow him a lot he's a Shiny developer and now works at our studio. He has just a really cool blog on all things Shiny. So if you have time to follow up on that, follow his tutorials. So some of the other things you should be aware of. So there's conditional panel where you can actually change UI elements, and you can show them if you want to show them or not show them, depending on how you want the user to interact. The global.r, I think I mentioned this before, as your projects get bigger, you might want to start moving some of your functionality off from server into a global file, so that it can have a separate helper file there. You can create multiple tabs in your Shiny apps. It doesn't have to be one tab the way we did it today. And then you can use data table output with the interactive tables, which I would continue to use, the DT package. You can also add images in Shiny apps. I thought if you were building logos. And you can also use update input to actually update the values instead of having to observe or react if you don't have to, if it's just a simple update that you're doing with your input values. Other cool Shiny packages. Other cool Shiny packages include Leaflet, which is for interactive mapping. I thought that was one of the cool things I had discovered. I think Lindsay was trying to crack that code. Shiny.js is basically a JavaScript application in Shiny. It's just really got some cool features that you can keep playing around with. Shiny Themes is a package. If you download it, the user can select what theme they want to see the package, like or see the application, like what color, and it's cool. It's cool, fun to play around with. Shiny Alert is like something like what we did now, where you can actually alert the user. So if they run a model and you're like, this is going to take 24 hours, why did you run this? So you want to tell the user that and tell them. And then Shiny Dashboard, I think a few of you mentioned, that's a standardization dashboard package. I showed you the regular Shiny package today because I thought it would be cool for you to know what functionality and flexibility is available to you. Shiny Dashboard has a standard format. If you download it and just put everything in the right area, then you have a pretty looking dashboard. So it's much easier to discover on your own. Okay, and if you want to get inspired with other Shiny apps, there's an entire RStudio Shiny gallery with fantastic apps that are built by the open source community. They even have a competition now every year, I think, for Shiny apps. So I hope I see your names on there as winners one day. And then there's Show Me Shiny, which is another gallery to just look at other Shiny apps. And you also see the code and other things available with it. So it's great to see what people are building. Yeah, that's a different website. Yeah, there's RStudio Shiny Gallery, and then there's Show Me Shiny. And if you, all of you have access to my presentation, so the links are in there. Did I have both of the links the same? I will update that link. Thank you. I was like, wait, why are they asking me this? Okay, and then other resources. So as you're learning more about Shiny in the future, go to the Shiny official website on our studio. There's a cheat sheet. There's so many other areas where you can learn about Shiny. It's vast, and I think there's a lot of videos too. So if you look online on YouTube, you can look up some of the conferences, and different people who are producing new packages come out and talk about them and do demos. So I think those are always really cool to watch. And obviously you can always go to Stack Overflow and post your questions on Shiny, or read other people's questions if you have time to solve their misery. Okay, that's it. Thank you. Oh, I want to say thank you to Lindsay, all the conference organizers, and the volunteers that helped me today. Thank you so much.